Laurie Funderburg, and our professional development today will be on response to intervention. Before we get started, I'd like for us to just have a little fun for a minute. We're going to start off with the teacher headband game. What I'll do is you have cards on your table. They're all placed upside down so that you're not going to look at those. And we'll have a headband for one member of your group. That member will go ahead and put the headband on their head and draw one card, place it so that you cannot see what's written on the card, but your team members will be able to see. They're going to give you clues to help you find out and figure out what is written on your card. You'll get a point for every time you can tell what the card is by just the clues. Some of the cards may say things such as, did you post your attendance? Do you know where Miss Sophie is? A kid threw up on the carpet. These are things that you might hear at Eden. So we want to play this game. You have about a minute apiece. Take turns so that it goes around the group, and the winner will definitely have a prize of chocolate. Okay, what I'd like to do after we have about 7 minutes of the activity, we're going to move into the RTI. And I wanted to start it up with the index cards that are on their tables. They'll take a card and write, what is RTI to you? I'd like for you to answer that and what it means to you in your classroom. They'll take a few minutes and discuss their answers and what they've written on their cards with their team members at their table. And then I'd like to show this video. I have an RTI video that's embedded here from YouTube. It's 4 minutes, 22 seconds, and it's pretty explicit on what RTI means. Then I'd like to kind of talk together. What is RTI? It is a multi-tiered approach to the early identification and support of students with learning and behavior needs. There are 3 tiers involved in RTI. Tier 1 is high-quality classroom instruction, the screening that takes place, and group interventions. Tier 2 is a targeted intervention. Tier 3 is intensive intervention and comprehensive evaluation. I'd like to go a little more in depth with each of those levels so that we can make sure we're clear. Tier 1 is your core instruction. It's all of your standards for your grade level and what you're teaching daily. All students receive high-quality, scientifically research-based instruction. All students are screened on a periodic basis to establish an academic and behavioral baseline. And this year will be another change for us. We will be using STAR 360, the CBMs. This tier is for all students, and it should meet the needs of about 80% of your students. Tier 2, this instruction may be needed if the student is not successful in Tier 1. This instruction is more individualized, intensive, and delivered usually in small groups. This instruction may be delivered in the classroom, but it could be a pull-out setting, or it may even be before or after school. Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction should meet the needs of about 95% of your students. Tier 2 instruction usually occurs for about 8 to 12 weeks with frequent progress monitoring. Progress monitoring data will determine your next steps. If a child is successful and doing very well, they may actually return back to a Tier 1 and not need Tier 2. They may be progressing and will continue with the Tier 2 interventions. And if there is no progress, you may be referring this child to Tier 3 and a possible evaluation. Tier 3 is when a student has not made progress in Tiers 1 and has documented unsuccessful Tier 2 intervention. That child may then be referred for comprehensive special education evaluation. Before you do that, you do want to make sure that you have considered attendance. You want to make sure that it's not the reason for that the child has not mastered the skills because they've just not been here. You also want to consider ELL to make sure it's not a language barrier. And then you also want to make sure that you're considering that it's not ineffective teaching. You want to make sure that your Core 1 is solid. Tier 3 instruction is usually delivered in a resource setting where individual student academic gaps are addressed with a research-based program. Tier 3 usually applies to only 5% of your students. Individual and annual academic goals are set with more frequent monitoring for those who need this intensive instruction. Now I'd like for us to put this into practice a little bit. You have some scenario cards. Those are the red cards that are on the table. And you're going to get with your grade level this time. You kind of came in and sat with a group, but now I'd like for you to get with your grade level. I want you to read through these data scenarios, and I want you to kind of determine what the next step should be and what tier of instruction should be the focus. Here are some examples of what the data scenario cards would be. Mrs. Perry's class was given a multiplication assessment after covering the 0 to 7 multiplication facts. All but 4 of his students received a D or an F. So I'd like for that team to be able to sit and discuss what this really means. What level of instruction are we concerned about? And I would hope that they would discover this would probably be a tier 1 instruction. If all but 4 of the students did not pass this test, then the core instruction was not sufficient. They may need to go back and do a reteach, maybe teach this differently. In this scenario, it says after a direct lesson on the CK rule in phonics, Sarah, Johnny, and Lily were still struggling. Now in tier 1, you may have a small group and you work with Sarah, Johnny, and Lily. But when you're discussing this, you would also want to consider being able to pull these few friends back for a few minutes into a tier 2 situation that you would work with them for a few weeks or however long it took for them to master that skill. The final card that example I've shown is that Mark has received Title I pull-out services for the past 8 weeks and is making some progress on decoding words. Now this is one that you might have some debate on. You might would think that he was successful in tier 2, let's go ahead and put him back to tier 1, he doesn't need this group anymore. But you also want to be careful. He may actually require that level of support and need to continue with the tier 2 interventions. I'd like for them to have time to discuss those and to share with others what they've seen and what they noticed, any concerns that they had, but now we want to move into the part that's really new to them. What will virtual RTI look like? I'd like to know what concerns do you have with the tiered instruction through online learning. Online learning is new for most of us, especially in our whole state is being affected with COVID. And we are currently trying to learn how to use Schoology with our school's PLP lessons embedded in that. And there are so many changes, but we also need to consider that we have this tiered instruction for our students. And so then the next question important here is, how will we meet the needs of tiered instruction? I really want to spend a little time on this and to have some discussion so that we can talk about what we need to do to meet their needs. I have a handout here for each of the teachers, and this is actually referencing a blog using technology to enhance RTI implementation. And this is an RTI blog that gave great information on how to use technology. This handout in particular really discusses how you can use technology in a traditional setting, which is wonderful because that's what we need to start doing, so that when we go to a quarantine or a blended setting, that we are prepared for that. And we also need to be using some of those things in our online learning. We need to be able to implement those. I do want to read this. There is no way a single teacher has all the time, all the knowledge, and all of the skills to meet all of the needs of every child in his or her class. That if we work together, we can, and we will, because our kids deserve it. Our exit slip would be, how could you provide tier 2 instruction for your online students? And I really do want them to think about this, because this would be what we're going to need to work on in our next sessions. We have weekly PLCs, and this will be a focus for us. Will be online learning and the technology in the classroom, and being able to implement these levels of instruction, these different tiers, will be vital this year. This is a rubric that we have on this PD. I am asking if they enjoyed it. I want to know if they have a better understanding of RTI or if this was a waste of their time. Will I use this information to make better academic decisions for my students? I would like to know if this was organized and time efficient. And then I'd also want to know if they're looking forward to the follow-up for more virtual RTI instruction and training. And then I have our references. And I'd like to thank you for joining me for this professional development. This will be ongoing throughout the school year. Thank you so much.